Hi, today we will explain the storyline of the movie titled Carrie, which was released in 2013. Okay, let's get right to the story. A baby girl is born in a house where a woman named Margaret White lives. Margaret is a seamstress who tries to be religious. She is not married. When she experiences excessive stomach cramps, Margaret thinks something is wrong with her. She even thinks it might be cancer. However, the excruciating pain immediately subsides when a tiny baby appears under her dress. Margaret never expected to give birth. She then took a pair of scissors, intending to kill the baby. But she couldn't bring herself to do it. She decided to cradle and raise the baby. Years later, the baby grew into a high school teenager. She was named Carrie. Carrie is a shy and awkward girl. At school, she doesn't have any friends. The students at her school are also not interested in her. Almost all of the students at school think she's strange, especially because of her religious nature. The popular and wealthy girls like to bully her, especially Chris Hargensen and her clique. Chris is close friends with another popular girl named Sue Snell. One day, after an embarrassing water volleyball lesson, Carrie and her friends shower to wash off the pool water. At first, Carrie washes herself as usual, waiting until all the girls have left the showers. Suddenly, blood began to flow down her legs. Panicked, Carrie screamed for help to all the girls who were changing clothes and joking around. Carrie even grabbed Sue's shirt with her blood-covered hands, and Sue spontaneously grimaced in disgust. Chris checked the blood and realized that Carrie was just getting her period. Chris then took a sanitary napkin out of the locker and gave it to Carrie, assuming that Carrie was used to getting her period. However, Carrie was too panicked to talk. She had never had her period before. This triggered Chris's mischievous nature, and he provoked the other girls to throw sanitary napkins at Carrie while yelling at her. Not stopping there, Chris also videotaped the embarrassing incident. Hearing the commotion from the locker room, their gym teacher, Mrs. Desjardins, rushed over. Meanwhile, Carrie, who was resigned to her friend's taunts, asked Mrs. Desjardins for help. Sue then told Mrs. Desjardins that Carrie didn't seem to know she was menstruating. Finally, Ms. Desjardins slapped Carrie to calm her down. When the slap echoed throughout the locker room, the chandelier on the ceiling suddenly exploded. Everyone fell silent. Carrie gradually calmed down. Ms. Desjardins dispersed the crowd, then told Carrie to see her after school. After the bell rang, Carrie went into the principal's office, where Morton was with Mrs. Desjardins. With great compassion, Mrs. Desjardins was concerned that Carrie did not understand what was happening to her body. She tried to explain slowly. Then, she asked Carrie to tell her what happened in the locker room so that the girls could be punished. On the other hand, she told Carrie to study in the library instead of participating in sports practice for a week. While giving instructions, the principal informed Carrie that she had to contact her mother and have her pick her up. This made Carrie upset and panicked because she was afraid of being scolded. As Carrie's emotions escalated suddenly, the dispenser bottle in the room broke. That day, Carrie had no choice but to be picked up by Margaret. On the way home, Carrie apologized for involving Margaret. However, she was also upset that Margaret had never taught her about puberty. At home, Margaret punished herself for Carrie's first period. For Margaret, menstruation was a curse that only befell sinful women. Carrie tried to argue with her mother and said that menstruation was normal for women. Margaret accused Carrie of being immoral and forced her to lock herself in her room as punishment, reading the holy book until she was exhausted. Carrie, furious at Margaret's treatment of her, accidentally made the door creak just by exerting her emotions. This made her realize that something was happening inside her. She followed Margaret's orders to pray. That same night, Chris, who had just returned from a party, discussed the incident with her boyfriend Billy and her close friend at school, Tina. Chris proudly felt that she had done nothing wrong, other than throwing a sanitary napkin at Carrie, with the intention of helping her. However, Carrie's reaction, which she thought was excessive, made her confused and lose sympathy for the girl. She then got the idea to upload Carrie's video to the internet. The next day, in Ms. Desjardins' gym class, Carrie's classmates were lined up on the sports field. Ms. Desjardins brought up their mistake and the viral video. However, she still wondered who had first shared the video. Ms. Desjardins was convinced that Chris was the culprit. Since no one confessed, they were punished that day by having to exercise until they were exhausted. Anyone who refused would not be allowed to attend the prom. The prom was an important moment for these high school students, so they were forced to comply rather than miss one of the most beautiful nights of their lives. However, Chris was different. After completing half a round, Chris cursed at Ms. Desjardins with harsh words. Chris then tried to get Sue and his other friends to protest, but they refused. As a result, Chris chose to leave the practice that day. He remained resentful and vowed to get revenge on Carrie, who had caused all of this. While her classmates were playing sports on the field, Carrie felt increasingly isolated. The kids maliciously scribbled inappropriate words on her locker, causing Carrie to bottle up her anger. In the bathroom, she focused her mental powers to break the glass. This power made her happy, so she searched for books on telekinesis and black magic, as well as videos that might explain what was happening to her in the library. To be sure, Carrie practiced her ability every night, flying books around her room. She was very careful not to let Margaret know, knowing her mother's reaction would be excessive. Meanwhile, Sue, who had only joined in teasing Carrie, felt guilty. When she was alone with Tommy, she looked troubled. Tommy, who had heard about the incident with Carrie, also felt that Sue should apologize to Carrie. Sue didn't know how to make up for her mistake until one day, Carrie's English teacher tried to embarrass her while reading a poem. However, Tommy felt the opposite. He praised Carrie's poem and sarcastically criticized her teacher. After this rescue, Sue caught Carrie glancing at Tommy. She then got an idea of how to make up for her guilt. After class, Sue asked Tommy to ask Carrie to the dance. Of course, Tommy was confused because Sue was his girlfriend. Naturally, she was the one he would ask. Plus, he and Carrie weren't close. Why would Carrie want to go with him? Sue explained to Tommy that Carrie seemed to like him. Besides, no girl would refuse an invitation to the prom. She was willing to skip the prom to give Carrie that opportunity. With a heavy heart, Tommy finally agreed. Like his girlfriend, Tommy was also a popular young man at school. That day, Tommy looked for Carrie and found her eating alone in the cafeteria. Tommy tried to be friendly with Carrie and joke around, but Carrie responded coldly. Without further ado, Tommy asked her to the prom. His first attempt failed immediately because Carrie was so embarrassed by the other students' reactions. She dashed Tommy's hopes and refused. She knew Tommy was Sue's date, but Tommy claimed Sue didn't want to go to the prom. Tommy's invitation made Carrie feel mixed emotions. On the one hand, she was flattered, but on the other hand, she was afraid she wasn't good enough to be with Tommy. Mrs. Desjardins caught Carrie crying and asked if the kids were bullying her again. Carrie then told her about Tommy's invitation. At first, Mrs. Desjardins was shocked, but she said it was a good opportunity. Tommy had asked her himself. She then asked Carrie what was making her sad. Carrie said she was afraid of being humiliated again. Mrs. Desjardins told Carrie to be confident and believed that Tommy meant well. She then asked Carrie to look in the mirror and taught her what to do to get ready for the prom. However, Mrs. Desjardins was also suspicious of Tommy's hidden motives, but she didn't want to show it in front of Carrie. After class, she called Tommy and Sue in for questioning. She suspected that the two of them had conspired to embarrass Carrie. However, they both said the opposite. They convinced Mrs. Desjardins that Tommy didn't care if the other kids saw him with Carrie. After being rejected, Tommy didn't give up. After school, he followed Carrie home and persuaded her until she agreed. They finally agreed to go at 7 o'clock the following week and come home early. Satisfied, Tommy agreed. That night, Carrie came home late because she stopped by the store to buy supplies for the prom. Margaret, who was very worried, was waiting for Carrie on the porch. Carrie then told her the reason she came home late and about Tommy's invitation to the prom. Instead of feeling happy for her daughter, Margaret was afraid that the kids at Carrie's school would laugh at her. Carrie argued that Tommy was a good boy. In her emotional state, Carrie threw Margaret into the air with telekinesis. Margaret gasped, immediately accusing Carrie of being a witch, but Carrie tried to convince her that there were many people like her. She didn't want to hurt Margaret and asked her to stop talking about the incident. Meanwhile, Chris still couldn't accept being banned from the prom because of Carrie. Chris now took issue with Mrs. Desjardins, who had spoken harshly to him. Finally, he was called to see the principal with his father. Mrs. Desjardins agreed to lift the prom ban as long as Chris could prove that he wasn't the one who spread the video. However, Chris refuses to hand over his phone, arguing that it contains a lot of personal documents. He whines and asks his father to defend him, But Chris's father agrees with Mrs. Desjardins and the principal. Because he continues to refuse, Chris is officially banned from attending the prom. After that, Chris met Sue, who was hanging out with other girls. He wanted to tell her that he had been kicked out of the prom. However, he couldn't accept that Sue didn't support him. Sue said they all deserved the punishment after what they did to Carrie. She didn't support Chris at all. Chris couldn't believe Sue had forgotten how Carrie had hurt her feelings, but Sue didn't care. Having lost his friend's support, Chris finally asked his boyfriend Billy to plan revenge on Carrie. Billy was happy to help Chris, but in an unusual way. A few days before the prom, Carrie was busy sewing the dress she would wear. News of Tommy leaving with Carrie reached Chris and his friends. From there, he learned that they had also been nominated as the best prom couple. That night, Chris, Billy, and some of their friends snuck into a pig farm. Chris didn't expect Billy's idea to be so extreme. They then returned home with a bucket of pig blood. The day before the prom, Billy and Chris tied the iron bucket above the stage where the prom queen and king would ascend to receive their awards. Chris had his doubts about the idea. However, hot-tempered Billy reminded his girlfriend that they couldn't cancel the plan. A few hours before the prom, Carrie had finished getting ready. Margaret didn't like Carrie's dress, which she thought was too revealing and boldly colored. She tried to persuade Carrie to cancel the trip and just pray together at home. Soon after, Tommy arrived in a rented limousine, proving Margaret wrong in her assumption that Tommy was just playing around. Eventually, Carrie grew tired of listening to her mother's whining. She locked Margaret in the punishment room and gagged her. To mask Margaret's protest from behind the door, Carrie turned on the music. Carrie then opened the door for Tommy, who was mesmerized by her appearance. Nervously, Carrie grabbed Tommy's arm and they left. Upon arriving at the prom, Carrie asked Tommy to wait for a moment. She was still very nervous, so Tommy tried to comfort her with soothing words and jokes. Finally, Carrie and Tommy went downstairs. The party started smoothly and was enjoyable for Carrie, even though she still didn't dare to join the dance floor. Mrs. Desjardins was also impressed by Carrie's appearance and invited her to chat. Tommy didn't forget to report the situation and Carrie to Sue at home. After sitting around for a few minutes, the music finally slowed down. Politely, Tommy asked Carrie to dance with him. Tommy's smooth moves quickly made Carrie feel comfortable in his arms. However, Carrie still wasn't sure she belonged there. Tommy gave the same answer, that he wanted Carrie to have fun with him, even until the prom was over. As the event reached its climax, Chris and Billy arrived to carry out their evil plan. They crept behind the stage while the party guests filled out their ballots for the best prom couple. Soon, the ballots were collected. Chris's close friend, Tina, was in charge of collecting them. She had conspired with Chris to switch the ballots so that Tommy and Carrie would win. After that, she signaled to Chris that the mission was complete, and Chris couldn't wait any longer. Meanwhile, Billy reminded him again that they would run away immediately after the bucket was spilled. He threatened Chris to focus on the plan, because what they were doing was a criminal act and could have fatal consequences. On the other hand, Sue received a message from Chris saying that Carrie looked beautiful. Suddenly, she felt that something bad was about to happen. Sue immediately sped to the prom to prevent it from happening. Before she could approach Tommy and Carrie, they were both called to the stage to receive an award. For Carrie, it was a very happy experience. From a distance, she saw Mrs. Desjardins shooing Sue away. Unfortunately, Mrs. Desjardins didn't give Sue any chance to explain why she was there. After that, Chris and Billy dumped a bucket of pig's blood right on Carrie's head. Suddenly, the whole room fell silent. The incident was embarrassing, with a video of Carrie playing on the big screen. However, Carrie's anger only truly boiled over after Tommy's head was hit by a bucket, killing him instantly. Using her telekinesis, Carrie locked the dance hall door and destroyed everything in sight. She did not hesitate to kill the children who had bullied her, trampling them to death, then setting them on fire. She also turned on the ceiling water faucet and cut the electrical cables, electrocuting everyone still inside the building. However, before going after Chris, she saved Mrs. Desjardins. Meanwhile, the mastermind behind the chaos was panicking in the middle of the road. Police cars, fire trucks, and ambulances arrived at their school. Chris tried to send a message to his father to pick him up, but Billy forbade it. He said he would take them both out of town and start a new life there. After the situation calmed down, Billy continued driving. Halfway there, Carrie blocked their path. Chris told Billy to just run her over, but Carrie's strength was so great that their car was crushed. Billy died instantly, and Chris tried to escape, but Carrie used all her strength and mind to hold the car back. Finally, Carrie threw the car into the nearest gas station, and Chris was unable to resist any longer. A huge explosion followed. The horrific incident left the survivors, including Mrs. Desjardins and Sue, in shock. Meanwhile, Carrie walked home. Covered in blood and crying hysterically, Carrie entered the house calling for her mother. At that moment, Margaret had managed to break down the door to the punishment room. Carrie went upstairs to look for Margaret, but Margaret ignored her even though she was at home. Carrie rushed to take a shower, then looked for her mother again. Margaret was waiting for her in the room. Margaret told her about her vulnerability when she was pregnant with Carrie without a husband. She then invited Carrie to pray together. However, she had secretly prepared a knife to stab Carrie in the back. She admitted that she should have done it as soon as Carrie was born. Now, she was targeting her until they were wrestling on the floor downstairs. Carrie did not give up so easily. She fought Margaret with telekinesis, using sharp tools to restrain Margaret, until Margaret died. As Carrie mourned her mother's death, Sue suddenly arrived. Sue said she wanted to help Carrie, but Carrie refused. There was nothing else Carrie could do to save herself, especially now that she was terrified of having killed her mother. Carrie's emotions peaked. Her house shook and slowly collapsed. Sue reached out her hand to help Carrie out, but Carrie refused. She sensed something else in Sue's body. At that moment, Carrie told Sue she was pregnant with a baby girl. Not wanting to hurt her, Carrie pushed Sue out of the house. In an instant, Carrie's house was flattened,